Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar from the UK and Ireland Spill Association. Thank you very much indeed for joining. I know there's a few more than, there's quite a lot attending, and I'm sure a few more will join, but I don't want to hold the majority up for the minority who aren't here on time. So welcome to this Spill Response to Biofuels. This is part of our knowledge base series of webinars that we have been running throughout the last year. They've proved quite popular, and the objective of them is to really share knowledge. Knowledge has to be improved, challenged, and increased constantly, or it vanishes. And the idea of these is to share our members' world-leading knowledge and to enable it to be found, accessed, and shared, and as a result, enable the knowledge of our community to be increased. Over time, we hope that our knowledge base, our resource of knowledge-based webinars will become a place where those involved or interested in spill response may come to inquire, increase their knowledge, understand what good looks like so that they can work more safely, be compliant with the relevant legislation, and thereby deliver a better service to their customers, who at the end of the day pay all our bills and keep us employed. So far, we've done 10 marine knowledge-based webinars, and we're doing a series of 4 inland-focused webinars this autumn. These are supported by articles which are in Spill Alert, where you can read case studies and examples of best practice. And the latest issue is coming out later this week. These can be accessed from our website, www.ukeirespill.org. And you'll find them within the knowledge base section. And the other thing to do is also look at our LinkedIn feed. So make sure you follow us. We're lucky, we have over 1,250, I think it's 1,240 followers, and that's steadily growing. And it helps spread knowledge throughout our community. So today we're talking all about the spill response to biofuels. For some who've got grey hair, you'll remember that there was a thing called the Renewable Transport Obligation Order, which mandated that from 2008, all fuel that was sold for transport use should have a bio element within it. And initially, when it was introduced, it was ethanol in petrol and a thing called fatty acid methyl ester in diesel. And the goal was that the quantities within it would steadily increase, such that we were in a sense protecting the environment from harm through harmful emissions, but equally extending the life of what was of hydrocarbons. Now I think that has changed, but obviously the benefits of using biofuels can be considerable in terms of emissions, particularly in particulate emissions and nitrous oxide. So there's been lots of benefits. Now, the initial ones produced were ethanol in petrol and fatty acid methyl ester in diesel. And it caused huge disruption across the fuel industry. And for those within it, there was a lot of learning to be done. Firstly, with ethanol, people found that it quite quickly dissolved gaskets and seals on fuel infrastructure. And the fatty acid methyl ester was extremely difficult to accommodate within its host hydrocarbon. And so it was really, really difficult to manage that initial process. After a while, the industry got used to it, and generally we found that it has worked. The industry has got used to it, and the initial problems have been overcome. Now we're moving into the second generation of biofuels, and these are sourced from much more sustainable sources, but they also pose problems. And so UK and Ireland Spill Association, with International Spill Accreditation Scheme last year, undertook quite a lot of study of this, and John Burton, who is the managing director of Oracle Environmental Experts, and some of his staff led the research into it. And so the webinar today is about sharing that research and sharing the findings so that we're all better informed. Anyway, that's where we are. So I'm going to stop sharing, introduce John, and allow him to share the knowledge that he's gained with you. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Mark. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, and all looks good. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a great introduction. You've almost given the presentation, so that's it, everyone. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's some of you may have seen the presentation previously. It's one that I've given at an inland seminar and at Contamination Expo as well. But for those that haven't seen it, it's going to provide you with a brief sort of run through of biofuels and how they are released to the environment and how they then are transported throughout the environment and the implications for spill responders. So I would just caveat this presentation in that I've just done a night shift on a spill incident on an airport. So there's a danger that I might start talking about Peppa Pig at any moment. But bear with me. So it's a topic generally that's gaining increasing attention, as many of you will be aware. The use of biofuels is increasing as the use of fossil fuels decreases. So hopefully it's going to be of interest to everyone. So in the presentation today, I'll give a brief introduction to biofuels and why we're likely to see an increase in their use in the coming years. I'll cover the properties of biofuels, briefly touching on the chemistry of the different biofuels and providing some detailed information on specific products, which I expect are going to increase in use in the UK and Ireland. I'll then summarise how different biofuels behave in the environment, and we'll finish with a review of the different spill response options for specific biofuel products, and a few case studies as well of incidents that we've dealt with in the past. So, what is a biofuel? Well, they're defined as fuels that are produced from biomass, for example, vegetable oil, animal oil or fats, waste cooking oil, and generally as opposed to fossil fuels, such as petrol, diesel or kerosene. They offer a much more sustainable energy source than petrol or diesel and can produce significantly lower emissions and toxins than fossil fuels. They can be used in their pure form, but are commonly blended with existing products such as petrol and diesel, as Mark mentioned before, in order to reduce emissions. So there's a number of different industrial sectors that are using an increasing amount of biofuels, and this is a result of legislative as well as voluntary means. So for example, as Mark mentioned, the RTFO, the Renewable Transport Fuels Obligation, that brought in the requirement for transport fuel to have a percentage of biofuel derived from a sustainable source, and that's currently up to 10% in petrol and 7% in diesel, which is why you see E10 and B7 at the pumps. So changes to the RTFO compel owners of transport fuel who supply at least 450,000 litres a year or more to make sure that that mix is at least 12.4% biofuel by 2032. In 2018, according to government figures, the use of biofuels saved 3,727 kilotons of carbon dioxide, the equivalent of 1.5 million average car emissions per year. In the home heating sector, Offtech are really pushing the use of biofuels. So they've completed research on the use of biofuels, and that revealed that both 100% pure biofuel and a 30% blend of FAME, that's the fatty acid methyl ester that Mark mentioned as well, and kerosene can provide the best carbon reducing routes for the least financial outlay. So Offtech state that renewable liquid fuels manufactured from waste materials could provide a drop-in replacement for heating oil, and that these fuels can be quickly brought to market. They also have the potential to massively reduce emissions from the UK's 1.5 million and the Republic of Ireland's 686,000 oil-heated homes. An example of the potential use of biofuels in this sector is given by the fuel distributor Mitchell & Webber. They're currently trialling the use of hydro-treated vegetable oil as a drop-in replacement for kerosene. And that trial is running on a bungalow and an office in Redruth in Cornwall, which previously relied on kerosene for heating. So with minimal changes to the boiler, the HVO is literally a drop-in replacement. There's a need for new HVO nozzles in the boiler burner, and they've been developed by Mitchell & Webber, and all that needs changing is the nozzle and pump pressure settings for the boiler to switch from kerosene to HVO. In the mobile power generation sector, for both voluntary reasons to reduce carbon emissions and legislative reasons, the sector is seeing a dramatic increase in the use of biofuels. One example is Power Electrics, who now use biofuel across 100% of their generator fleet. They're using a biofuel product called Green D, which is also a hydro-treated vegetable oil. And Power Electrics aren't the only company that are doing this. I was on site last night with Sunbelt, who have just finished working on COP26, where the generator fleet used for that was all fueled by HVO as well. So we have an increasing use of biofuels across a range of sectors, but owing to the chemistry of the pure and the blended biofuels, once released to the environment, they behave differently to fossil fuel derived products and can present a challenge to spill responders. They also present a challenge when it comes to storage, as Mark mentioned, as they readily absorb water, which encourages microbial activity, stimulating fungal growth and biofilm development. This eventually causes filters and fuel lines to block and can increase tank corrosion, increasing the chance of spills happening in the first place. So, biofuels in a bit more detail. They're often broken down into three categories: first, second, and third generation biofuels. And we're going to briefly look at each of those now. So first generation biofuels, these are directly derived from food crops. So examples of first generation biofuels include ethanol and biodiesel, or FAME. Biodiesel is defined as a fuel comprised of monoalkyl esters of long chain fatty acids derived from vegetable oils or animal fats. The literature contains lots of references on biodiesel production from a wide variety of feedstocks, but at present, the main feedstocks are soybean oil in the US, rapeseed oil in Europe, and palm oil in Southeast Asia. The second generation biofuels are produced from the non-food parts of crops, so potentially a more sustainable source. So they're produced using materials consisting of the non-food parts of current crops, and that can include stems, leaves, husks that are left behind once the food crop has been extracted, as well as other non-food crops grown for this production, like grasses, jatropha, and miscanthus. Examples of the second generation biofuels include hydro-treated vegetable oil, the HVO, and that's a paraffinic biofuel made from vegetable oils such as rapeseed, sunflower, soybean, and palm oil. It can also be produced from waste cooking oil and jatropha as well. So the third generation biofuels, that refers to biofuels that are derived from algae. So previously they had been grouped with second generation biofuels, but when it became apparent that the algae are capable of much higher yields with lower resource inputs than other feedstocks, it was suggested that they could be moved to their own category. So examples of biofuels that can be derived from algae include ethanol, butanol, petrol, biodiesel, and jet fuel. So in terms of the properties of the different biofuels, the chemical and physical properties of biofuels are the key to their potential for widespread use, but they also present a challenge for storage, transportation, and spill response. So one of the key differences between fossil fuels and biofuels is that biofuels contain oxygen, and because of that oxygen, the biofuels contain alcohols, esters, ethers, and acid groups, and these will interact with each other and with other substances, and importantly, they will interact with water in a very different way to products like petrol and diesel, which don't contain oxygen. Because biofuels have significantly different chemical properties from the conventional or petroleum fuels, the environmental fate and transport of the biofuels differs from that of conventional fuels following a release as well. So a typical molecule of biodiesel looks like this, with a long chain of carbon and hydrogen atoms, as well as a functional group on the end with oxygen. So just for comparison, regular diesel, similarly a long hydrocarbon chain, but with no oxygen present. So the chemical structure and the associated properties of the different biofuels dictates how an oil partitions into soil, water and air, and that directly influences the risks associated with a biofuel release and has implications for spill response methods and remediation methods when we're dealing with biofuel spills. So one of the things that we've looked at in a bit of detail is HVO, particularly as we're heavily involved with kerosene spills currently. And as I said before, Offtech are really pushing the use of HVO. So as mentioned before, HVO is currently being used as a drop-in replacement for diesel generators and potentially as a drop-in replacement for home heating. So this schematic here just shows a simplification of the production of HVO compared to FAME or biodiesel. So HVO is produced from vegetable oil, and the hydrotreatment process is a hydrogenation process that is used to remove around 90% of the contaminants such as nitrogen, sulfur, oxygen, and metals from the liquid fuel. So to assess the HVO product in more detail, we've completed some preliminary studies on HVO and kerosene for comparison. The products were provided to us by Mitchell & Webber. So visibly, the HVO product supplied is a bright red color, whereas kerosene is a straw yellow color, as shown here in the vial on the left. So this HVO sample came blended with a red dye, as the product was also being tested on a commercial farm. The HVO product has a mild odor, whereas the kerosene product, as many of you will know, has a strong oil odor. So to assess how the HVO product partitions into the environment and the likely risks associated with the increased use of the product, we performed a range of basic tests and completed some detailed laboratory analysis on the HVO product as well. So what we've got here are some chromatograms of the analysis of the HVO product and the kerosene. So samples of the HVO and kerosene were submitted for detailed GCMS analysis, and the chromatograms for the whole samples are shown here. So from here, we can see that the HVO is comprised of a less volatile and mid-range hydrocarbon product. So essentially at the front end of a chromatogram, you see the short chain monoaromatic compounds like the BTEX compounds, and they're just absent in the HVO chromatogram. Whereas in the kerosene, that's comprised much more predominantly of shorter chain hydrocarbon compounds, including the monoaromatics. So further detailed analysis was carried out to split the aliphatic and the aromatic fractions, again to assess how the products are likely to partition in the environment and to assess the risks posed by those products. So what we've got here is the HVO sample is almost completely dominated by mid-range aliphatic hydrocarbons. So you've got HVO sample on the left and the aliphatic compounds at the top. So the bulk of the product is made up of those aliphatic compounds, with the aromatic compounds nearly absent. And in contrast, you've got a spread of the compounds, both aliphatic and aromatic, in the kerosene sample. So that contains a much greater proportion of the short range or smaller aliphatic and aromatic compounds. So the table here, this confirms the proportions of the aliphatic and aromatic hydrocarbons in both the HVO and the kerosene samples. So the HVO fuel was shown to be a mainly aliphatic product, predominantly covering the range C13 to C17. The kerosene sample was consistent with a typical kerosene fuel, so predominantly covering hydrocarbon compounds in the C8 to C15 hydrocarbon range, with a much higher proportion of aliphatic to aromatic compounds, but still a much higher content of the aromatic compounds within the kerosene compared to the HVO. Detailed analysis of the BTEX compounds in both samples, that again showed considerably higher concentrations of the aromatic compounds in the kerosene sample compared to the HVO. And one sort of caveat I would put on this analysis is that the reported concentrations here could potentially have been derived from the tanker that was used to deliver the HVO fuel that had previously been used for the delivery of kerosene. So there could be some carryover from other sources in this analysis. And the expectation is that the HVO contains next to no BTEX compounds at all. So with respect to pH, so polyaromatic hydrocarbons, again, we had that analysis carried out in detail. So we've actually got relatively low concentrations of PAH compounds in both fuels. However, detectable concentrations of naphthalene and fluorine were reported in the kerosene, and a detectable concentration of naphthalene in the HVO sample. But again, there could potentially be some carryover from the delivery tanker used to provide that fuel. So one of the first tests we had carried out on the fuels was just to look at their tendency to form a NAPL layer, so a non-aqueous phase liquid layer. So we basically got an approximate 10-to-1 solution of the products and shook that vigorously, and the samples were studied to assess the NAPL formation. So this is a short video which I hope will play with the kerosene on the left and the HVO sample on the right. So this is after the products have been shaken. And as you can see, what we have here is the rapid formation of a NAPL layer in the kerosene sample and a much slower tendency for the HVO to form a distinct NAPL layer. So within a sort of 30-second period, you've got a NAPL layer formed on the kerosene sample, but you've still got dissolved hydrocarbons within the HVO sample. And that is a function of the oxygen, again, aiding the solution of the HVO product. Notwithstanding that initial sort of formation of the NAPL layer, after we left the samples for an hour, both samples did have a distinct and clear NAPL layer, although the HVO did appear to have a much greater proportion remaining in solution, which again is what we'd expect given the presence of the oxygen within that product. The next basic testing we carried out was just some VOC testing, so volatile organic compound analysis, just carried out using a PID. So the HVO and kerosene samples were placed into individual test pots, and those pots were left open, and over a set time, the room temperature and the VOCs for both products were recorded. So as shown here, the results clearly demonstrated the higher volatility of the kerosene compared to the HVO, with kerosene showing VOC concentrations ranging initially from 681 parts per million, ppm, to 162 ppm, compared to HVO, which showed VOCs ranging just from 18.1 ppm to 7.2 ppm. So a much higher volatility of the kerosene compared to the HVO sample. We also then looked at the effect that the HVO and kerosene had on polystyrene. So the intention here was to look at how these products, if they come into contact with building structures such as thermal insulation, how the products would affect that material. So the photos here show the polystyrene in the HVO and kerosene on day 1 and day 30 of the tests. So after a period of 30 days, the polystyrene in the HVO sample showed next to no change at all, with just maybe some slight discoloration. In contrast, the polystyrene in the kerosene sample had fully absorbed the oil and had reduced in size by more than 50%. So you had almost complete collapse of the polystyrene that was placed into the kerosene sample. We also looked at the absorbency potential of the HVO compared to kerosene. So we placed strips of the polypropylene absorbent pads within both products. And to be honest, they were both absorbed by the pads, confirming that the polypropylene absorbents could be used in response to the spill incidents of these products as well. So, summary of findings. A key aspect of the chemistry of the HVO is its negligible aromatic content. This reduces the risk to the environment and human health, as there's negligible BTEX and PEH content and a very low VOC content as well. There's also reduced potential for impact to building structures and services, given that negligible BTEX component. That's going to reduce the potential for impact to building structures and services over time. The high proportion of aliphatic hydrocarbon compounds results in HVO binding strongly to soils as well. So particularly those with a high organic content. So again, once the HVO is released to the environment, there's going to be a reduction in the risk posed as a result of that strong absorption to soils, and particularly those with a high organic content. So looking at that in a bit more detail, how do biofuels behave when released to the environment? So biofuels have significantly different chemical properties from those of conventional fossil fuels, and the environmental fate and transport of the biofuels differs as a result. So any fuel, including biofuels, released to the environment is immediately subjected to a combination of chemical, physical, and biological processes, collectively referred to as weathering. So we're going to look at a few of those processes in a bit more detail. So firstly, evaporation. So fuels with high vapor pressures, such as ethanol, will tend to rapidly evaporate. And the vapor pressure and Henry's law constant, which means the tendency for a substance to partition into the vapor phase from the dissolved phase, that significantly influences the persistence of volatile fuels in soils and surface waters. So it should be noted that biofuel blends will behave differently depending on the proportion of the blended biofuel and the parent fossil fuel, as well as the evaporation potential of the fossil fuel that the biofuel has been blended with. So with respect to some of the common biofuels, the rate and amount of evaporation ranges from HVO, which has a low volatility and a low tendency to evaporate, all the way through to ethanol, which has a high volatility and a high tendency to evaporate. So as spill responders, we need to be aware of these aspects and take account of those potential features when we're responding to an incident. Dissolution and dispersion. So again, there's a wide range of sort of different behavior of the different biofuel products. So for example, biodiesels can contain mild surfactants, and biodiesel blend can disperse naturally in water, much more so than standard diesels. So the rate of natural dispersion can increase droplet formation and slow the rate of droplet resurfacing. So when released to the environment, the biodiesels can form a white, sort of milky emulsion, as you can see here on this picture, from the US EPA. So that again presents a real challenge to spill responders, because there will be a significant proportion of the biofuel that is actually within the water and not just floating on the top of the water, which we would ordinarily have with a fossil fuel spill. So vegetable oil, this is a precursor to HVO, so that can form sort of thick emulsions and is also miscible with water. And there's an example of a vegetable oil on the right here, which is a soya oil, and we'll look in a bit more detail in relation to that spill later on. Ethanol is completely soluble in water, and ethanol in fuel blends can also increase the dissolution and dispersion of other components, so other more toxic more toxic components such as BTEX. So it can actually increase the migration of those compounds as well. So the miscibility of the biofuels with water has significant implications for spill response techniques and pollution potential. So in general, biofuels are more soluble than fossil fuel counterparts, and solubility increases again from HVO all the way through from biodiesel, butanol to ethanol. Another important weathering process is biodegradation. So most hydrocarbons and fossil fuels are characterized by branching, saturation, and high hydrophobicity. So that's basically they hate water. And those can all negatively affect biodegradation rates. In contrast, biofuels such as biodiesel, ethanol, and butanol have simple structures and are readily biodegradable under both aerobic and anaerobic conditions. However, spills of blended biofuels will present a challenge owing to the mixture of the two component parts, some of which are more readily degradable than others. So the release of a readily degradable biofuel results in rapid consumption of oxygen in the receiving waters. So biofuels in groundwater tend to exhibit smaller plumes with shorter longevity than plumes associated with fossil fuels. Biofuels such as HVO are proven to be readily biodegradable, and their chemical structure, as we mentioned before, given their high aliphatic content, also inhibits their migration in soils. So again, plumes associated with HVO spill releases are also going to be smaller compared to the fossil fuel releases. So what I've got in this section is a quick summary of how several common biofuels behave in the environment. So firstly, ethanol. So in soils, ethanol is rapidly biodegradable and preferentially partitions to water rather than soil. In water, ethanol will mix with water and at high enough concentration will separate from petrol components in any blended fuel. It can also increase the mobility of petrol components present in the blend. It's rapidly biodegradable in groundwater and surface water, but will cause an oxygen crash in receiving waters. And research has shown that oxygen depletion in watercourses appears to be a more critical impact than direct toxicity of the ethanol to aquatic organisms. In air, ethanol is highly volatile and is also denser than air and will settle in low areas, but should also disperse rapidly. In sewers, the potential decrease in oxygen caused by rapid degradation could reduce the efficiency of wastewater treatment works, and there's a potential flammability hazard when released to foul or storm drainage systems and in any confined spaces associated with those as well. With respect to FAME or biodiesel, so these again are readily biodegradable, but will degrade faster under aerobic conditions. They'll strongly absorb to soils, particularly those with a high organic content. In water, FAME or biodiesel is slightly soluble with a water-soluble fraction ranging from 13 to 110 milligrams per litre, compared to fossil fuels of 20 to 40. However, the water-soluble fraction of biodiesel lacks the acutely toxic aromatic components, such as the BTECs and PEHs, that drive the toxicity of the fossil diesels. They degrade rapidly and can also cause an oxygen crash in any receiving waters. They're estimated to degrade up to 4 times faster than fossil diesel. Phase separation in biodiesels can lead to multiple layers when they're released to a watercourse. So you can get fats that float on the water surface, fuel suspended in the water column, as well as a milky emulsion, as we've seen previously. So that again presents a challenge when it comes to recovery of that sort of product once it's been released to the environment. In air, FAME or biodiesels have a generally low volatility and much lower compared to ethanol. In sewers, the high fatty acid content of FAME or biodiesels can result in a high BOD, again, which can affect the efficacy of the wastewater treatment works that might be receiving any discharge of these products. So HVO, in soil again, readily biodegradable, but again, faster under aerobic conditions. It will bind strongly to soils owing to the prevalence of the aliphatic compounds, which limits the transport through soils, again, particularly with those with a high organic content. In water, slightly soluble. Recent analysis has shown concentrations of TPH up to 26 milligrams per litre in water. It will degrade rapidly, but will also cause an oxygen crash in any receiving water due to the biodegradation that occurs. In air, the low volatility compared to ethanol and kerosene. In sewers, again, there's a likely high BOD, and that's likely to affect the operation of the wastewater treatment works that might receive a discharge of these products. So, with regards to spill response options, how a biofuel behaves when released to the environment directly influences the risks associated with its release and the spill response methods that should be used to mitigate the associated impacts. So releases of biofuel or the biofuel component of blends will require additional emergency response considerations in addition to those required for a standard fossil fuel release. Oh, sorry. So for example, fires involving biofuel blends containing greater than 10% ethanol should be treated differently than traditional petroleum fires because these mixtures are water miscible flammable liquids and they can degrade the effectiveness of some of the non-alcohol resistant firefighting foams. So what we've got here, just some response considerations for the different biofuel products. So with respect to ethanol spills, specific concerns relevant to the emergency response to ethanol spills include the increased potential for fire hazards, such as the fire risk associated with an ethanol fuel release, as well as the requirement to use alcohol-resistant foams. Appropriate response options for ethanol spills include excavation of grossly contaminated soils and in situ treatment if further remediation is considered necessary or required by regulators. With respect to releases to ditches and small streams or rivers, earth dams can be used to block outlets to watercourses or sections of watercourses, and the ethanol and ethanol water mixes should be removed by total fluids pumping or tankers for off-site disposal. Aeration can be used in watercourses to increase dissolved oxygen concentrations, but one key thing here is that ethanol is highly soluble and will not be stopped by absorbent booms, sandbags or bales once the product has entered the watercourse. So there are some absorbent products that can be used to absorb biofuels such as ethanol and biodiesel, but they must be used to remove the fuels before they enter water. So owing to its high solubility, complete removal by carbon filtration may also not be possible as well. For larger rivers, containment booms and earth dams can be used to prevent further infiltration or discharge. The petrol fractions of the blended fuels can be removed by absorbent booms. And again, aeration can be used to increase dissolved oxygen concentrations. Any water supply works downstream of release would need to be informed as soon as possible and to take measures to potentially stop their intakes to ensure they don't take any ethanol into their works. So with respect to biodiesel and HVO spills, again, excavation and disposal of contaminated soils is an appropriate response option, followed by in situ treatment if needed. So for releases to ditches or small streams, again, earth dams can be used to block outlets to other watercourses, and biodiesel or HVO NAPL can be removed from water surfaces using skimming and through the use of absorbents. Pumping may be required if there is stratification in the water column and to address those parts of the product that can't be removed through the skimming or absorbents. And again, aeration can be used to increase dissolved oxygen concentrations. So similar approaches can be used when dealing with larger rivers alongside the use of containment booms and larger absorbents. So for wetlands and marsh environments, again, similar approaches can be used, but during low water conditions, any pooled product should be removed by pumping or tankering. So just to finish off, got a couple of case studies. So firstly, a spill of HVO, and then secondly, a spill of soy oil. So the first case study involves the release of an estimated 800 litres of HVO from a portable generator set. That was during works to repair a pole-mounted transformer. So within 2 days of the spill, 25 tonnes of HVO contaminated soil had been excavated and removed. However, elevated concentrations of hydrocarbons up to 13,481 milligrams per kilogram were identified in soils at the base of the excavation, and that was considered to pose a potential risk to the groundwater beneath the site, which required further assessment. So 5 boreholes were subsequently advanced to 10 meters depth, including one directly through the base of the previous excavation. So within all boreholes, we encountered a thin layer of topsoil above a firm to stiff light brown clay with intermittent fragments of flint and angular cobbles, which was understood to be the mapped ODB member on this site. And that was above a sandstone aquifer at depth. So the clay and the intermittent flint gravels was found to be present in all of the boreholes down to the completed depth of 10 meters. So soil sample analysis from those boreholes showed concentrations beneath the spill origin reduced to non-detectable levels by 8 meters. So the depth to groundwater in the boreholes ranged from 5.3 to 8.7 meters. And we carried out groundwater sampling from all of the boreholes on 2 occasions after installation, and found no detectable TPH concentrations or BTEX concentrations or pH concentrations in any of the boreholes on sampling. So the principal conclusion here was that the swift action to remove the HVO contaminated soils and the strong tendency of the HVO to bind to soils reduced the potential impact to groundwater below the site. And the EA in this instance accepted the findings, and no further works were required following the groundwater investigation. The second case study involves the release of around 10,000 litres of soy oil. This was to a culvert and some nearby watercourses. So emergency response works included the deployment of containment booms and absorbents in the small stream, as you can see here, and then the construction of earth dams and vacuum tankering of the bulk product from identified collection points where we could get access to the watercourse. So once the initial oil removal had been completed, we carried out a flush and capture system employed to introduce fresh water to the watercourse to flush and capture any residual soy oil at strategic points downstream, where it was then removed by vacuum tanker. So a total of 17,000 litres of soy oil and oil water mix was removed from the impacted watercourse for appropriate offsite disposal. Verification water sampling was carried out to demonstrate the effectiveness of the response works, and these surface water samples didn't contain any detectable concentrations of hydrocarbon compounds after the works were completed. In addition, we looked at BOD and COD, and they were low throughout all samples, indicating no significant impacts, ongoing impact to the watercourse after the works had been carried out. So to recover the bulk of the soy oil, whilst ensuring downstream impacts were mitigated, we carried out a range of spill response options, and the end result was a watercourse restored to its original condition after a couple of weeks and nights of hard work. So, in summary, biofuels are fuels that are produced from biomass as opposed to fossil fuel derived products. They offer a more sustainable energy source than petrol or diesel and can produce significantly lower emissions. They can be used in their pure form, or they can be blended with other fuel products as well, other fossil fuel products. The increased use of the biofuels in coming years and reduced use of fossil fuels is driven principally by a move to reduce carbon emissions. The biofuels behave differently in the environment as a result of their different chemistry to fossil fuels. And importantly, they contain oxygen, which increases their solubility in water and increases their potential for biodegradation. How the biofuels partition into soil, water, and air depends on the chemical structure associated with the different properties of the different fuels. The fuel's chemistry directly influences the risks associated with the spill and has implications for the most appropriate spill response and remediation methods that are carried out. Always consider the health and safety issues with regards to spill response to biofuel spills and take appropriate precautions. Tailor response techniques used to the biofuel released and to the environment into which it's released. Some biofuels being used as drop-in replacements for fuels such as diesel or kerosene present much lower risks to health, building structures and services and to the environment. Owing to their negligible aromatic content, fuels such as HVO and FAME are much less toxic, will bind strongly with soils, and are also more degradable when compared to fossil fuels as well. That is it. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that was of interest, and I understand it's been recorded, so you can review the presentation at a later date should you so wish, or share it with others if you should so wish as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, John. If you could just unshare, oh, you have unshared, that's great, thank you. Right, has anybody got any questions? I've had one to kick us off from Robin Fucher of Commercial Fuel Systems. The question is reference the HVO case study. What was the cause of the release and what additional control measures could or should have been applied? That would be the first part of the question.
I believe it was a failure of a part on the generator. So there was a mobile fuel cube that had the HVO, and then there was a mobile generator that was being used to provide temporary power. So there was a failure on the generator set itself. I don't think they could have done anything else apart from bund the whole of the generator set and tank unit. That would be the other option. Whether cost came into it, I couldn't say, but that would be the only other option, would be to bund the entirety of the generator set and the tank as well.
And so the second, this comes on to the second part of this question. Robin, do interrupt if I get it wrong. So it really, in a sense, if there is the potential for an HVO spill, it is really quite important to have a secondary form of containment around the device, like the generator that is using it, in the event of, because it is essential to have the spill contained immediately.
No more so than the standard fossil fuel that would be used for the purpose. I mean, in some respects, as I've shown here, the need for the secondary containment is reduced given the properties of the HVO. But as a company that sort of carries this work out on a regular basis, you know, somebody that provides portable generators may want to think about bunding the entirety of their kit. That would certainly be a way to prevent it happening again. Yes,
because often there seems to be, in generators have a shallow form of secondary containment, but rarely have complete containment.
Yeah, and it's often the pipe work between the tank and the generator that goes, or a nozzle somewhere on the generator as well. So it would need the whole set and the tank to be completely bunded, with sufficient capacity to handle what's in the tank, as well as any sort of small amount that may be underneath the generator as well.
Yeah, good. That was good. Hopefully I've answered that. I'll ask that question correctly, Robin. From Jane Eade at the MCA, are there any other industries that might be able to suggest best practice for dealing with some of the solubility issues associated with biofuels? I'm thinking about things like silage and milk releases, or are the response techniques fairly standard across most groundwater contamination incidents?
Good question. I'm sure there are companies out there that deal with agricultural liquids that could potentially offer some alternatives, but fundamentally because of the extra or increased solubility of some of these products, it's containing it using things like earth dams, and then coming up with a way to handle the bulk fluid. That's what we've got to sort of look at and potentially improve, I suppose.
Okay. Hopefully, Jane, that answers your question. A question from Andrew Kyle. Although risk to health, buildings and the environment might be decreased with biofuel losses, if being used in the domestic environment, might the properties of the fuel cause a higher number of losses than we see now through equipment failure in the boiler? And will the boilers need increased servicing? Would you know? You may not know the last bit.
I would say it's probably early days to comment on that. It's a good question, and potentially yes, given the problems that have been seen previously in terms of sort of increase for tank corrosion and the difficulty in storage of some of these products. I would say that there could be an increased potential, but I still think that the impacts associated with these spills are going to be much less than you're seeing currently in kerosene, for example. So I still think that the extent of remedial works that might be required following spills of these products is going to be significantly reduced.
I think there is certainly work being done by UKIFTA, United Kingdom and Ireland Fuel Distribution Association, and Offtech within these trials, particularly to find out what other risks there are. And that there are, and you mentioned, John, the first phase of the trials, which was a relatively limited number of properties, that gave them the confidence to go to a much broader trial, which is now underway, with a significantly greater number of private households being used. And so the purpose of that is to really find out how safe it is to introduce HVO or products like that into the domestic environment, which would have a significant increase on emissions, as your presentation mentioned. It is also worth noting that HVO has been available now for at least the last 18 months to commercial users. And I think they really are, they have been very popularly adopted by people like Power Electric, Speedy Power, and a number of the generator users, particularly for use in urban situations where emissions are really, really critical. So I think there is growing confidence that they work and that they do reduce emissions. There is some question on fuel consumption, because I think there is possibility that it uses more fuel, but the emission savings are significant. Another one from Jane Eade. I've heard anecdotes in the maritime arena of ethanol-based fuels causing things like seals to degrade at 10 times the rate. So assume the answer to Andrew's question is yes. And certainly my experience of being in this industry since the introduction of some of these fuels is that where ethanol is involved, the corrosion is considerable. And it initially, when they were introduced, the effect on seals was totally underestimated, seals and gaskets. And we found when we were dealing in the railway industry that all traditional seals soon melted when they're exposed to products which had a reason sort of 8 to 10% of ethanol within them when mixed. It just destroyed the seals. And it was only when we went to, I think it's called Viton, that they were actually that defeated. But the cost of the seals was approximately 10 times that of the traditional seals. So I think where ethanol is involved, you have to really, really undertake regular inspection of the facility that is using it. And the first detection is usually some weeping around the seal and some discoloration at its edges, where the seal actually is exposed to the air, because you notice that there's discoloration, but also it's damp. So I would say that anywhere where a fuel with ethanol in it, you have to have a much better routine maintenance and inspection system for it.
Yeah, I think I'd just say that that's probably more likely for a commercial setting. I think
it is, but not for domestic.
Robin put a comment up here on the chat about that. That's certainly an issue for petroleum storage, but in terms of domestic heating, I don't think that's going to be such an issue. One thing I didn't say in the talk was that I've seen recently that the BEIS, so the Business, Energy and Industrial is it strategy? I forget what it's called, but they published some recommendations with regards to off-grid heating, and I don't know whether they're ignoring Offtec or what their game is, but they have basically issued a air source heat pump first approach for off-grid heating, and have issued a statement basically saying they want all off-grid homes to be off oil by 2025. So it's going to be fun to see what happens in the next few years.
I think what UKIFTA and Offtec are doing with their alternative fuel strategy is to try to fight that. And I think there's many homeowners who are on oil or oil heating, and I'm sat in one at the moment. We would be strongly in favour of adopting HVO as opposed to going down the air source or ground source heat pump route, which is significantly more expensive. But yeah, so I think that answers all the questions. Does anybody have any more?
I think Simon O'Rourke's got one. He's asked if any regulations, or is there any indication that regulations will be updated, especially with regards to storage of biodiesel and HVOs? I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. I would imagine it's still too early at this stage to to know whether there will be a requirement to upgrade any regulations. I think following the trials that Offtec and others are carrying out, then I would imagine that there could well be some updated guidance and regulations around sort of oil storage regulations.
Yes, and I can also put on that the APEA, in conjunction with the Energy Institute, has a publication called the Blue Book. The Blue Book is primarily designed at forecourts and retail type fuel installations, where obviously they have issued guidance on the increase in ethanol to E10, because obviously that increases the risk, both from an explosive risk, because you've got far more ethanol in the fuel. It also has implications to separators, but it also has a significant implication to the infrastructure that is being used. So they have issued guidance, and that is available through the APEA website, which is apea.org.uk. So I would have a look at that. I would also, there will be more guidance produced. And one thing that Robin puts up, and Robin is one of our corporate members, we're very much with a technical mindset. We could put through guidance on some of this, because if it is helpful, but I wouldn't say that we'd be experts on tanks and tank storage, but it's something that we could do in conjunction with, say, that in conjunction with some of the manufacturers. I would also urge you to look at Offtec and UKIFTA websites, because they are the ones running these trials, and they will be producing information on these trials, which will then keep you updated. But it is obviously, the trials are going on to learn things, and that learning will be cascaded back into industry and to users of these fuels. So if there aren't any more questions, I'd like to, John, thank you very much indeed for presenting. Oh, hang on, I've got one from Andrew. Would you consider the reduced oxygen concentrations from biofuel degradation significant enough to cause fish deaths in the marine environment and fish farms?
Potentially, yes. I think I mean, it obviously depends on the amount of fuel that will be released compared to the receiving water. In the open sea, probably not such an issue, but certainly in a fish farm environment, I would expect there would certainly be a potential issue there.
Yeah. Okay. Right, to conclude, well, thank you very much indeed, John, for that, and thank you very much. We are recording this, and it will therefore be up and put up on our website early next week. You know, and I would say that have a look at it. Do feel free to share it. There's no cost for this. There's no cost for The video will be accessible through a link on our website. Share it, use it as a toolbox talk, cascade it around your organizations. The object of these is to share knowledge and ensure that we don't trip up. One point that Tony Brown, who is in a sense one of my equivalents at UKIFTA are happy to help on storage and we'd be happy to work on some form of guidance. So maybe Tony and I will catch up and we'll start knocking something together for people to have a look at through our technical committees. But thank you very much indeed for joining. I've got to give a plug, which is on our next webinar, which is our last one before Christmas. Where is it? Right, there you go. It's knowledge base, it's soil sampling and an analysis. It's being done by produced by Seed Environmental and Nicholas Colton Labs. Obviously, we referred to soil sampling in this, John referred to it in his presentation, and drilling. Yeah, there was one 2 weeks ago on drilling and drill rigs, which will also appear shortly on our website. But this is about soil sampling and analysis. I hope that they've been useful. And as I say, the recording will be available. Keep watching on LinkedIn, and it will tell you when things are put up on our website. But thank you very much for attending, and have a good evening. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.